The Galactic Dominion had seen 1,000 worlds fall before their might, and Earth would be no different. That was a consensus aboard the battle cruiser Ebon Claw. The finest soldiers of the Dominion lounged in the dim glow of hyperspace transit, their confidence as vast as the void outside. Commander Vorkin leaned back in his chair, his deep-set crimson eyes flickering with amusement as his officers exchanged smug remarks about their next conquest. Primitive world, fractured governments, and its most dangerous warriors are criminals, he scoffed, shaking his horned head. This campaign will be nothing more than a glorified training exercise. Across from him, Captain Scar let out a short bark of laughter, his mandibles clicking in amusement. A penal colony. That's what High Command wants. They don't even see Earth's criminals as worth exterminating. Just gather them up, drop them into containment zones, and let them rot. He paused, flexing a Talon hand, though I hope a few of them struggle. I'd hate to waste a mission on something so dull. Lieutenant Jorith, younger than the others but no less convinced of their superiority, grinned as he activated the holo display. A three-dimensional projection of Earth flickered into view, dotted with points of interest. Scans indicate resistance is minimal. They fight amongst themselves, using outdated kinetic weaponry. No orbital defenses to speak of. Their greatest warriors are part of something called the criminal underworld, and their so-called legends are just men with knives and bullets. Humans have always exaggerated their prowess, Vorkin said, waving a clawed hand dismissively. They write myths to make up for their weakness. Spartans, samurai, assassins. Every species has its warriors, but the strong do not need stories to prove it. A low chuckle rippled through the command chamber. They had conquered worlds where soldiers had been bred from birth, where war was not a profession, but a way of life. Compared to that, Earth's scattered factions were laughable. Only one voice did not join in their mirth. Colonel Drax, an aging strategist with scars crisscrossing his leathery hide, observed the display in silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and edged with something the others had not expected. Caution. I've seen humans fight before, he said, and I've seen their criminals. You do well not to underestimate them. Jorah scoffed. We've reviewed every record. If humans had anything resembling real warriors, we would have encountered them in the wider galaxy. All we've seen are mercenaries, desperate, undisciplined, weak. Drax exhaled slowly. That's what I thought once. Then I saw a warlord on the outer fringes of Dominion space hire a group of human enforcers. Thought it would be easy to crush them. But they didn't fight like soldiers. They fought like animals, like something born in the dark, something that knew nothing but survival. His gaze swept over them, as if daring them to dismiss him. They don't fight for honor, for glory, or even for survival. They fight because it's the only thing they know. Vorkin smirked, unimpressed. Sounds like desperation to me. We've crushed desperate species before. Drax's lip curled. They didn't smile when they killed. A silence settled over the chamber. The battle-hardened officers, each veterans of a dozen campaigns, were not easily rattled. But Drax's words carried the weight of experience. The moment passed quickly, and Scar leaned forward, the glow of the holomap casting shadows over his chitinous face. Then it'll be a good hunt, he said, voice eager. Let them fight however they want. It won't change the outcome. The ship's alert chimed, signaling their imminent arrival in Earth's orbit. The time for talk was over. Vorkin stood, straightening his uniform. Enough speculation. We are the Dominion. We do not fear those who skulk in the shadows. The Ebon Claw emerged from hyperspace with predatory grace, sliding into Earth's orbit like a blade poised above its prey. Below, the planet spun in quiet defiance, oblivious to what had arrived. Vorkin allowed himself a small smile as he gazed down at the blue-green world. Soon its criminals, its so-called legends, would learn what true power was. The Ebon Claw cut through Earth's atmosphere like a falling star, its hull glowing with the heat of re-entry. Below, the city sprawled in eerie silence, abandoned skyscrapers standing like broken teeth, their shattered windows reflecting the gray sky. The Dominion had chosen this place for a reason. No government interference, no civilians to complicate the operation, just the criminals, just the hunt. Commander Vorkin stepped on the barren pavement, his armored boots sending small echoes through the empty streets. The air smelled of old fire and rust, the remnants of a place long forgotten. His troops followed in disciplined formation, weapons at the ready, exuding the confidence of beings who had never known true defeat. Jor surveyed their surroundings with mild disappointment. "No welcoming committee?" he muttered, his rifle humming as it primed. "I thought humans were territorial." Scar clicked his mandibles, scanning the shadows. "They are, which means they're watching." Vorkin smirked. Let them see what their new masters look like." The soldiers fanned out, securing perimeters, marking potential strongholds. Scanners showed faint life signs deeper in the city, scattered like vermin scurrying into hiding. No formations, no real defenses, just pockets of life, lingering in the ruins. Drax, ever the skeptic, crouched beside an old bullet-ridden vehicle, running a clawed finger along its rusted frame. "This city's been a battlefield before," he murmured. "Humans don't abandon places without a fight." Jorah snorted. "What are they going to do? Throw knives at us?" The answer came sooner than expected. The first shot cracked the air, primitive yet precise. Jorah staggered back, his shoulder armor dented, blue blood seeping from the impact. The round hadn't pierced, but had struck with enough force to send a message. They weren't alone. From the high-rise ruins, muzzle flashes lit up the dusk. Bullets whizzed through the air, striking against Dominion armor in a staccato rhythm. More than just desperate resistance, this was coordinated, practiced. Vorkin ducked behind cover as another volley rained down. "Return fire," he barked. The Dominion's response was immediate. Energy weapons flared, streaks of plasma cutting through the darkness, reducing old structures to molten rubble. The air filled with the acrid scent of scorched concrete and ozone. Yet, for every building that crumbled, the enemy slipped deeper into the city's veins, moving unseen, striking with purpose. Drax fired a shot into the shadows, narrow in his eyes. "This isn't random. They're drawing us in." Vorkin's jaw tightened. He had expected resistance, but these weren't panicked criminals firing in desperation. They were ghosts, striking and vanishing before the Dominion could pin them down. Jorah wiped the blue streak from his shoulder and growled. "I don't like this." Scar, crouched behind a collapsed streetlight, let out a dry chuckle. "What's wrong, Jorah? I thought you wanted them to struggle." A scream cut through the chaos, one of their own. All eyes snapped toward the sound. A Dominion soldier lay sprawled in the alleyway, his helmet removed, throat slashed with surgical precision. No scorch marks, no sign of struggle, just death, swift and silent. Jorah cursed under his breath. What kind of criminals use blades against Dominion armor? Drax exhaled slowly. The kind that don't need to waste bullets. Vorkin clenched his fists. "Enough. Sweep formation. Push them toward the center. We take them head on." The soldiers adjusted, tightening their net, forcing their unseen enemy into the city's heart. More flashes of movement. Shadows darting between broken walls. Bodies slipping through ruined corridors. But something gnawed at Vorkin's instincts. It was too easy. The humans weren't being pushed back. They were leading the Dominion forward. Then, the street beneath them exploded. The shockwave sent soldiers sprawling, armor scraping against debris. Smoke filled the air, thick and choking, blinding their sensors. Through the haze, figures emerged. Human, clad in makeshift armor, eyes sharp, weapons steady. They were not undisciplined rabble. They were hunters. The first human struck like a phantom, a blur of steel and shadow. He slid beneath Scar's raised rifle, a knife flashing upward, severing armor joints in precise, practiced movement. Scar's body went rigid, then limp. Jorah fired, but his target had already moved. Another Dominion warrior fell, his plasma rifle clattering uselessly against the pavement. Vorkin gritted his teeth. The battle had shifted. The hunt had become something else. Predator and prey were no longer clear. Through the chaos, one name echoed among the human whispers. A name that did not belong to any government or army. A name that carried the weight of something far older. Baba Yaga. Vorkin's blood ran cold. The battlefield had gone silent, not the silence of victory, nor the uneasy lull before another assault, but something deeper, something wrong. Vorkin crouched behind the remains of a collapsed structure, his soldiers forming a defensive line around him. The humans had melted back into ruins, leaving only the dead behind. Scar's body lay twisted on the pavement, his vacant eyes staring skyward. The wound in his throat a message rather than a casualty. This was no ambush. This was a hunt. Jorth wiped sweat from his brow, his grip on his rifle tightening. They could have finished us, he muttered. Why didn't they? Drax remained motionless, his eyes scanning the darkness between buildings. They're watching, he said, studying us. A shadow flickered at the edge of Vorkin's vision, vanishing before he could react. His heart pounded, but he forced himself to remain still. He was no fool. He had fought on 100 worlds, had faced armies bred for war, yet nothing had felt like this. His enemy was not fighting for honor, nor for survival. This was something else. This was patience, precision, a force that did not kill for the sake of victory, but because it had already decided the outcome. A whisper drifted through the air, low, guttural, barely human. Baba Yaga. The name had been spoken before among the human criminals they had captured and interrogated. It had surfaced in their panic transmissions, in their final, breathless pleas. At first, the Dominion had assumed it was a call sign, perhaps the leader of a resistance cell. But now, as that name slithered through the ruined streets, it carried weight, not as an identity, but as a warning. Jorth's hands trembled as he reloaded his rifle. "What does it mean?" he asked, his voice just above a whisper. Drax exhaled slowly. A story humans tell their children to keep them from wandering too far into the dark, a thing that comes to the wicked. Jorth let out a hollow laugh. "We're not children." Drax met his gaze. "No, we are the wicked." Something moved again, closer this time, too fast for the scanners to register. A Dominion soldier let out a strangled cry and collapsed, his throat cut so cleanly that no sound had escaped before death. Vorkin snapped his rifle toward the movement, but the darkness had already swallowed it whole. A voice, deep and steady, cut through the night. "You shouldn't have come here." Vorkin turned sharply, but there was nothing, just empty streets, the wind rattling broken glass in skeletal buildings. His pulse thundered in his ears. "We came for criminals," he called out, keeping his tone even. "Not ghosts." The laughter that followed was quiet, but it carried through the ruins like a whisper in a graveyard. "Then you found something worse." A blur descended from above, landing with inhuman grace. The figure was clad in black, his face obscured by a simple mask, his movements unervingly fluid. He did not stand like a soldier. He did not carry himself like a man bracing for war. He stood as if war had never left him. Baba Yaga. The soldiers reacted instantly, their weapons trained on the figure, but he did not flinch. He tilted his head slightly, as if considering them, as if weighing the worth of their lives. Vorkin was the first to break the silence. "You think you can stop us alone?" Baba Yaga took a step forward, slow, deliberate. "You came to make this place a prison," he said, "but you don't understand the men you've come to cage." Jorth sneered, raising his rifle. "We've fought killers before." Baba Yaga didn't stop. "Not like these." His voice was steady, devoid of bravado. "Not like me." Jorth fired. By the time the plasma blast reached where Baba Yaga had stood, he was gone. A second later, Jorth was on the ground, his rifle knocked from his grasp, a knife pressed against a gap in his armor. He hadn't even seen the movement. His breath hitched. "Do you understand now?" Baba Yaga murmured. Drax moved, but the figure was already gone, slipping back into the ruins. Jorth scrambled to his feet, pressing a hand to his throat, realizing the knife had barely grazed the skin. Not a failed kill. A message. Vorkin turned, his mind racing. This wasn't a battle they could win with superior firepower. This was something else entirely. The Dominion had expected savages, disorganized remnants of a dying world. Instead, they had found a monster. Baba Yaga had let them live. For now. But the hunt had only begun. The air was thick with the scent of blood and smoke. The Dominion soldiers stood in a tightening formation, their once unshakable confidence now cracked, their eyes darting to every shadow. They had landed expecting a swift conquest, a routine operation against an inferior species. Instead, they had found something they could not understand, something they could not control. Vorkin knew fear was beginning to take root. He could see it in the rigid stances of his men, in the way their weapons twitched at every phantom movement. Jortha's breathing was uneven, his trigger finger resting too lightly on his rifle's grip. Drax, ever the realist, had stopped speaking entirely, his gaze locked on the darkness ahead. Then the silence broke. The first scream came from the perimeter. A soldier toppled forward, a gaping wound in his chest. No gunfire, no flash of movement. Just death, as sudden as a blade in the dark. Another soldier spun to fire, but shadow dropped from above, a whisper of motion followed by the wet sound of a throat being cut. Panic rippled through the ranks. Shots fired wildly into the ruins, plasma bolts illuminating empty spaces where nothing stood. The enemy was never where they expected. Vorkin clenched his teeth. "Hold your ground," he barked, but his voice no longer carried the weight of authority. His men had stopped listening. They were too busy surviving. And then he appeared. Baba Yaga stepped from the ruins like a specter made flesh, his silhouette framed by the flickering embers of burning wreckage. He did not move like a man bracing for battle. He moved like something that had already won. Vorkin raised his rifle and fired. Baba Yaga was already gone, a blur of motion. Then Jorth crumpled to his knees, eyes wide, a knife buried hilt deep in his side. He gasped, clawing at the wound, as if trying to hold himself together. Baba Yaga didn't watch him fall. He was already moving again, weaving through the chaos, his strikes precise, methodical. Drax lunged, swinging his blade in a desperate arc, but Baba Yaga slipped past the attack, twisting behind him. A single, brutal strike to the back of the knee sent Drax collapsing to the ground. The old warrior snarled, pivoting to strike again, but a boot crashed against his wrist, sending his weapon spinning away. Vorkin turned, his rifle tracking, but hesitation stalled his trigger finger. Baba Yaga stared at him through the blank mask, his breathing slow, controlled. Vorkin had fought wars, crushed civilizations, razed entire planets in the name of the Dominion. He had stood before champions and warlords, had battled creatures born from the darkest edges of the galaxy. But nothing, not the endless battlefields of the Dominion, not the horrors of 100 conquered worlds, had prepared him for this. Baba Yaga took another step forward. Vorkin fired. The shot missed. Or maybe it didn't. Maybe it was simply too late. Baba Yaga was already inside his guard, already striking. The rifle was ripped from Vorkin's grasp, his balance stolen in the same breath. A hand clamped onto his throat, forcing him back, slamming him against a crumbling wall. For the first time in his life, Vorkin felt powerless. Baba Yaga leaned in, his voice low, steady. "Go home." Vorkin choked out a breath, his vision tunneling. "You don't belong here," Baba Yaga continued, tightening his grip just enough to remind Vorkin of the choice he no longer had. "Tell your Dominion what waits for them in the dark." Then, just as quickly as he had appeared, he was gone. Vorkin collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath. Around him, the battlefield was silent once more. The Dominion had not been defeated in open combat. They had not been overwhelmed by numbers. They had been hunted, and they had lost. They could not even fully understand. Inside the ship's command chamber, Vorkin sat in silence, his fingers curled into fists, his mind replaying the battle over and over. It had not been a battle. Battles had rules. Battles had purpose. What had happened on Earth had been a reckoning. Jorth lay in the med bay, breathing through clenched teeth as the surgeons worked. He had survived, but just barely. The blade that had taken him down had been placed with precision. Enough to hurt, enough to remind him of his own mortality, but not enough to kill. That was the message. Every Dominion soldier who had made it back to the Ebon Claw carried wounds that spoke of restraint, not mercy. Something worse. A warning. Drax sat across from Vorkin, his wounded knee wrapped in a brace, his face unreadable. "We report this," he said finally, "but what do we say?" Vorkin's jaw tightened. The truth was too simple, too brutal to be palatable. The Dominion thrived on conquest, on absolute superiority. To admit that they had been bested, not by an army, not by advanced technology, but by a single man, was unthinkable. And yet, the truth remained. He let us live, Vorkin said, his voice hollow. He could have wiped us out, and he didn't. Jortha's voice was hoarse from pain. He wanted us to remember. Vorkin turned toward the viewport, staring down at Earth's darkened surface. The planet was still there, unchanged, as if the battle had never happened. But something had changed. The Dominion had expected a world of criminals, a planet full of remnants waiting to be subjugated. What they had found instead was something ancient, something lurking in the ruins, waiting for those foolish enough to claim dominion over a graveyard. We call it a tactical failure, Vorkin said finally. We say the terrain was unmanageable. Resistance was greater than anticipated, that there was nothing of value to take. Drax exhaled, considering. And the real story? Vorkin turned his gaze toward him. The real story is the one no one will tell. Silence stretched between them. The Dominion would send others. Eventually, the hunger for expansion would not be deterred by whispers of a ghost in the ruins. But the men who had survived this mission, those who had looked into the abyss and seen it look back, they would carry the warning with them. Baba Yaga was no myth, no story to be dismissed. He was real, and he was waiting.